然后我先介绍一下我们学校哈，就是我们做了很多对话藤校学霸的讲座，哎呀，没有一次介绍我们学校的。然后很多家长说，哎呦，你们学校这么好的活动，这么多的活动，你居然都没有介绍。那今天呢，就是来一个弥补啊，我给大家介绍一下啊。OK。OK， 你看我的题目上，我们学校呢叫知北中文中心，但是呢，我们的总部叫阳光国际教育啊。我们现在已经是 global， 因为我们有很多家长在加拿大New Zealand Spain Italy 还有 Belgium， 有一次我发现在比利时也有，还有中国的家长啊。我们是没有做任何广告的，因为中国的家长都是美国的家长告诉中国的家长来上我们的课 ，OK。我本人介绍一下哈，我本人呢是辽师大毕业，然后北师大硕士毕业，然后是在美国的南孚大学，就 University of South Florida in Tampa， 我是在那块读的是那个教育学院读的一个副博士学位。什么叫副博士学位？我们叫 EDS， 就是差几门课就拿到了那个博士学位，很遗憾没拿到。然后呢，我在中国呢是双语记如果大家能看到中央电视台4台视频道那原来我是那里的记者和编导然后呢，我也在那个英文版中国妇女杂志社工作过在那边翻译也是翻译，也是记者，还是作家和诗人出版过一部长篇小说在写第2部小说，这个第2小说难产，一直没出来写很多诗歌。我写诗歌的时候，我就是不高兴的时候写诗歌，悲伤的时候写诗歌。说这个疫情呢，我写了很多诗歌，因为我不高兴我还是英语教授，就是赴美之前呢，我是也在一家学校当过英语教授教4级6级英语。我还是中文教育的项目协调员，在印第安纳大学协调中文教育项目。然后呢，还是大学课程的设计人员。这是什么意思呢？我现在是在美国一个社区学院工作，专门是指导老师设计网络课程的老师网络课程有什么困难的地方，他来找我我帮助他们，协助他们。但是我不去做事我只指导老师做事是做不过来的。然后呢，我是现身海外中文教育10多年是知北中文中心的校长，阳光国际的创始人。知北中文中心简介我们只有7年的历史，但是那个硕果累累我们硕果累累。我们那个我给大家看一下这是我们的网站这是我们网站，这是疫情之前大家在一起吃饭我们那个人民日报海外版对我们进行过采访然后呢，我们还有那个就是 Chicago Tribune 也对我们进行过采访这是我们的一些很多活动都是记者们对我们采访大家有空的话可以看一下OK， 好，回到 PPT。我们的汉语呢教学呢是沉浸式教学，小朋友的识字量可以达700到900。我们很多小朋友那个汉语水平呢 HSK 可以达到3级，那么3级和4级，那么5级可以保送清华和北大是免费的就是4级和5级就是免费的，就是你去清华北大上学是免费的这不是开玩笑的，这是真的。然后呢，我们每个学期呢都100多门网课，1/3是免费课。这个免费课呢，你不要以为这免费课是高中生上的，不完全是。 我们有2/3的是成人来上的，有硕士学位、学士学位和博士学位的。比如说我们的 AP Chemistry 就是美国博士啊，美国教授上的啊，很多AP 统计都是这样，还有 Honor Chemistry 都是这样的啊。然后呢，我们没有宣传团队，都是家长的口碑，所以价格便宜。什么意思呢？如果就是你雇了很多 marketing 的人员给人家付工资，那公司那工资都会转嫁到学费上面，所以说我们没有这一份开销啊，所以我们价格比较便宜啊，都是家长通知家长。OK， 我们的师资特点，我们是专业老师教专业课。什么叫专业老师教专业课？就比如说这中文课，我们是对外汉语专业毕业的老师，或者是中文系毕业的老师教这个中文课。什么历史系毕业的、地理系毕业的、中文系数学系毕业的，我们这样中国人我们都不要啊。然后呢，数学一定是中国人，一定是数学系毕业，一定是在美国工作，我们这样的老师哈教数学。英语呢就是美国老师在美国获得学位，或者是教育学位，或者是英语学位这样来教，我们都是这样，一定要是专业课，专业老师教专业课。然后呢，什么叫福利待遇呢？就是老师都是比较优秀的老师哈，我们那个精挑细选，然后小班授课，老师留作业、判作业和反馈。昨天我弄了一个晚上啊，为什么弄了一个晚上啊？我们那个家长说的，哎，马校长啊，你这个东西老师就给分数不给反馈，这不对吧？那老师不是糊弄吗？哎，我就跟老师说了，老师说，那么下回我会提供更 detail 的东西。那后来家长又说了，哎，说老师就给分数，那我就赶快去看一下，发现的结果呢，老师给了很多 comments， 但是呢家长看不见，这是 Google Classroom 的一个 bug。那昨天晚上我花了一个晚上啊，我又当学生又当老师了，哎，整明白了为什么怎么能看见，就是这样。所以说我们老师呢提供很多都是 inline comments， 就比如说，比如说这个除了优秀教师任教，我们老师就会 highlight 这个东西 ，highlight 以后呢，然后旁边有个 comment 说哦这哪块不对，我们都是提供这样的 ，OK。免费课，我们每个学期会有30到40门免费课啊，退款政策，我们无条件、无理由退课，就是你说要我不想上课了 ，OK， 可以退课可以退课，什么时都可以退，什么时可以退，然后可以提供报税证明啊。OK， 最后一项哈，我们有5个大赛。中文作文比赛就是我们现在刚刚启动的中文作文比赛，特等奖是挨封是很拉风的哈，特等奖是挨封。然后呢，英文作文比赛我们马上就启动英文作文比赛等我们那个秋天那个课程开放注册以后就启动英文作文比赛。我们还有绘画大赛绘画大赛我们是那个北京侨联举办的，就是全世界华裔青少年书画大赛，我们是芝加哥赛区的协办方。还有书法大赛书法大赛也是，还有朗诵大赛。朗诵大赛是我们是美国的，一共有5个协办方，我们是美国5个协办方之一。这个朗诵大赛非常牛的，这是全世界范围内的。我说这些都是我说这些，除了那个英文不是，英文比赛是全美的，剩下都是全世界范围的比赛哈，所以我们比赛也比较多。然后我们有亲听中华网络夏令营。亲听中华网络夏令营是什么意思？就是现在的在网上学习一些中国文化的知识，将来会有实体营，中国开放了，我们会去中国。那么在中国那个10天到2周的时间是免费的全部的吃喝玩的小朋友都是免费的。如果家长当那个带队老师也是免费的我们经常会有一对夫妇带2个孩子他带队，然后2个孩子整个全家就等于免费旅游了，就是这样。然后我们还有各种的实用讲座，非常实用这讲座各种各样的讲座。种种义工奖我跟大家讲一下，种种义工奖50以上的小孩就可以申请种种义工奖了但是很多一般都是高中中学来申请种种义工奖，所以大家感兴趣种种义工奖的来联系我们那这个是我们的那个联系方式这是我的 这是我们另外一个摄像长的。OK， 好了，那现在呢，我就把时间交给我们的学霸，EVELYN 讲，有请。
好，谢谢马校长，我听你讲，感觉像你很厉害。谢谢大家今天晚上来，我就screen share 一下我的 presentation，然后我们就开始。
You can
So-
speak in English, yeah. I think
Oh, okay. All
you
right.
feel more
So,
comfortable, yeah.
all right. So, hi everyone. My name is Evelyn, and I will be a incoming freshman at Yale University in the fall. So today I'm just going to kind of give you guys some of my tips and tricks and my advice on how I navigated through the application process in the past year. So before we get started, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. So I will be a history of science and medicine major at Yale in the fall, and I will also be on the pre-law track to go into some form of law that I'm going to kind of figure out as I go through college. But at the moment, that's kind of my intention. And I'll get into what like the major looks like and how I ended up picking my major at my school a little bit later in the presentation. A lot of other stuff about me: when I was in high school, I was very into doing congressional debate. I played field hockey for my school, and then also did club outside. And then I also have been playing the violin for a really long time in my life, and then also kind of dedicated my time towards youth orchestra outside of school, and then also within the school ensemble as well. And then a couple of my favorite classes were just my English literature and Spanish literature classes, and then my European history class when I was a sophomore. So a lot of the trends that I did throughout high school was focusing a lot on the humanities aspect, despite kind of going into a STEM focused field. And I'll kind of talk about how I kind of made my decision between these two kind of fields and how I ended up choosing which one I thought was going to be for me. So kind of getting into the application. So the first portion is usually the biggest bulk, and this kind of comes with a lot of advice and a lot of struggle for students when they first kind of start off on their college application, which is the Common App. So the Common App application has a lot of things for students. It's kind of like the bare minimum and the basis of their presentation to the colleges that they choose to do. So within the Common App itself, there's the actual Common App essay that students write. This is like the one big essay that people focus on a lot. And this tends to be, you know, some sort of story or personality trait that they want to present to the admissions committee, that maybe like what they chose to major in or their classes or activities hasn't really shown. And then there are also aspects of the Common App application that include the awards and the activities list that you do. So those are also like different portions of the application that a lot of people kind of navigate through. With awards and activities lists, those tend to get a little confused between both like students and also parents or counselors that are kind of guiding them through the application process. So the difference between the two is that your activities list is 10 slots long. You can fill up to 10. You don't have to fill up all 10, but you can only go up to 10 activities. Those tend to be just extracurriculars that you did, activities that you dedicated a lot of time to in high school. So for me, that was like I said before, I dedicated a lot of my time to debate, and then eventually like earning leadership within that club, also being like a 4-year varsity athlete at school and being captain my senior year. Those kind of like all led up to what I was going to write in the activities list portion. And then what's different with the awards is that those are exactly kind of what they sound like. They tend to be not exactly like achievements within leadership, unless that is like the specific event that you might compete in for a certain club. So I know like at my school, there were a lot of clubs that were leadership based, and that's how you competed, and you kind of competed within like a business or a healthcare mindset. But typically like leadership positions don't really go in the honors and award sections. Those tend to be left for like legitimate accomplishments that you might have had. So for me, I kind of wrote about my debate awards and kind of what levels I achieved at state and national circuits, or kind of descriptions about like the writing awards I participated in, and also kind of science fair achievements. So anything that kind of felt like you needed to put a lot of effort, and then they ultimately like, if you felt like this achievement could have deserved like a medal or like some sort of certificate that came with it, that tends to go more towards the honors and achievements, versus activities tend to be more focused on clubs and positions. So that's like the beginning of your Common App application. Those are like the first couple of steps. And then the next portion is the actual Common App essay. So within the Common App essay, this is I believe like around 500 to 600 word essay that every student writes, and every single college looks at this application and looks at this essay as a reflection of who you are, and then how like you would contribute to the school through your own personality. This is not a place for you to kind of talk about achievements and to ultimately like relist your activities list or awards, because chances are like your admissions officers probably already looked at this portion before even getting to your essay. This essay has 7 questions that you can answer. These questions pretty much never change from year to year. So like the question I answered in my essay last year is like the same one that rising seniors are probably going to be writing about this year, and then also what seniors in the past have also written about. So these questions, there are 7 of them. You can choose any one of the 7 that you want. You only have to write and answer 1 question. And then within this question, you just want to feel like this is going to reflect who you are. A lot of times people worry about the Common App application because they feel like, oh, there's this stress that the topic you write about should be some sort of like life-changing, this is when you realize you want to do something. But a lot of times like that's really not the case. Like for example, like I live in suburban Illinois. I lived a pretty like chill life my entire almost 18 years now. Like there's never really been a moment for me where I was like, oh my God, like this is the moment that I discovered like how to be a better person, or I went through like some traumatic experience. Like not everyone kind of shares this basis. But even then you can find like a cute small story, or like multiple small stories that all have the same theme that kind of tie together and reflect your personality more than anything. So like I wrote about kind of discovering like my curiosity, and then how I truly love learning, in a sense that like it's something that motivates me to do more than just things that are in my comfort zone. And this is like, wow, this is like a pretty like everyone kind of experiences this. Though it just depends on like the way you present yourself and how you want to portray yourself within the Common App essay, and how you want to show yourself in like kind of your like one really big chance to show your personality to the admissions committee. This essay sometimes gets a lot of stress when it comes to, like within your application. Of course, there are multiple things. There's, your essay and your awards and your activities and everything within like the website for the Common App. But there are also, your grades and your activities, recommendation letters, the interview process. And a lot of times people kind of feel like the essay is like the make or break a lot of the time, because this is like something that you truly have 100% control over. This isn't like, people reading a number about you. This is people reading about something you chose to write and you chose to give. I don't really think like there's one major aspect of the application that determines whether or not you get in. Like if for some reason like you get deferred or rejected from a school, it's not because of like one part of your essay. Like you can't just be like, oh, I didn't get into this school because like the Common App I wrote wasn't good enough for this school. Like that's probably not the case. There's probably like a more like cohesive answer to that question for why you like maybe didn't get accepted the first time. But it's usually like you shouldn't put that much stress onto like this is it. You also want to think about like the rest of your application, because the entire application, when the committee at like the school's undergraduate admissions building reads this whole package about you, they want to look at things that are spread out through the entire portion. So every single piece of paper or file they look at about you, they kind of value all of those at the same level. So that's just like something I wish I had known when I was writing the application and the essay, because I just felt like the essay to me was super important because this was like my one shot. But in reality, like talking with friends who got in with me this year and also like the upperclassmen already at Yale, they were just saying like, oh, like, you know, I didn't write about like something huge, or like maybe it was something else, but it definitely wasn't like the essay was making or breaking their application. So another part of the written portion of the application that also gets talked a lot about, and this varies for school to school, are the supplemental essays. So the supplemental essays are individual essay topics that each school has for you. So if we look at Yale, for example, Yale has a pretty long supplement application. So this tends to, you will usually find these questions on the Common App as well once you add the school's like personal application to your list. So these are usually in the application as, you know, like personality questions or why this school, why this major kind of questions. And these are basic fundamental ways for your admissions officer to kind of like gauge an idea of just how badly or like how invested are you to go to their school. So there are 4 aspects to the supplement essay process that I feel like are really important. The first portion is research. So what I mean by research is that when you have a lot of applications, and granted, so like I didn't apply to as many schools as like a lot of my friends did. Like the average student will apply to maybe like 18 to 12. So I don't have like the most advice when it comes to like researching multiple schools. But like in general, when I was doing like my college list and researching in the fall when I was still writing all my essays, what I found to be really helpful is that for each supplemental essay, if you feel like you could just copy and paste the entire written response over to like another school's essay, then you're probably not being specific enough. So the most common type of supplemental question is why this school? And usually, especially in that case, if you can say what you said for one school for like the other schools you're applying to, then your admissions officers will probably not be impressed with why you genuinely want to go to this school. The admissions officers really care about how much you care about the school, and being able to kind of name specific events, specific professors, or specific like cultural values and social scene ideas that you want to engage in definitely shows a heightened sense of dedication and like passion to pursue this school as your dream school, or even just like as a school you just genuinely want to go to for, you know, whatever reason. So being able to name proper nouns and being able to talk about, you know, like what you think a day in the life as an undergraduate student might be at that school is going to emphasize how much you genuinely want to care. And that's going to gauge your admissions officer's attention when they're reading your application. So the second step is being able to focus and hone in on answering the question. These questions are not as long as the Common App. You do not have that much time, nor do you have that much space to write about these. The time aspect is mainly if you're applying to multiple schools at one time, then you probably don't have as much time to focus on each individual essay as you would like to. So that's when you want to really like dig in and spend as little time as needed to kind of get through every single application, especially during the regular application portion that we'll kind of talk about in a little bit when it comes to like the timeline of applying. But another thing you want to focus on is being able to answer the question. So you also don't have that many words to kind of go through. These supplemental essays are kind of like quick things that admissions officers look at just as they're reading your application. They're trying to gauge your like inner personality. They don't spend too much time reading like a 500, 600 word essay like they do on the Common App. So here you don't want to like dilly-dally with what you're saying. You want to get straight to the point and you want to answer them as quickly as possible. So for Yale, they really like tested their applicants when it came to this kind of like focusing aspect. They had a 200 character question, and they had 4 of those. And they were just simple questions like, if you could teach a class here, what would you teach? If you could invite anyone to dinner, who would it be and why? Like these questions, they're really short. They're like maybe like 35 words long, but they just really test your ability to write in a way that kind of conveys the entire question's answers within a timely manner. But you also don't want to lose your personality within all these application process questions. So your personality is probably like the best tool you have, especially when it comes to the supplement essays and also your interview. So a lot of times people are kind of like thrown off by the idea of being, you know, like their fun, kind of like energetic selves when they're doing college app applications, because you really think about this process as a time where you're like just kind of sitting in your room and you're focusing and you're just kind of like working through all these essays and trying to be as like your best academic versions of yourself. But a lot of schools really care about not just like what your academics and your background bring to the school, but also what, you know, you as a person will bring to your school. Like, you know, are you the kind of person who's going to be like cheering the loudest at the annual football game, or are you the person that is super invested in, you know, really using like the local library and the art museums? Like they want to be able to gauge like a wide range of people that come to their institution, and the only way they can do that is by seeing, you know, like the fun version of you through your writing and your interview, but more specifically through your writing. So there will be like the questions that are just really fun for, like, you feel like, you know, do colleges really need to know this about me? Yeah, they probably do, because they want to know, like, if you were in this situation at this college, like, what would that be like for you, and what would the school kind of get out of that? One of my favorite questions that Yale asked me was like, what are 2 random like polar opposites you embody? And that was just like their way to be able to see like, oh, like on a normal day, you can be like this total different person, just like with a snap of a finger, because this is just like how you are. And that's just something I feel like my admissions officer really cared about, because she really liked reading about students who are not just well-rounded, but also students who just genuinely care about like being a like fun and social person. And honestly, like no personality is like bad per se. It's just how you present yourself and being able to convey, you know, like who you are. They're not going to judge you for who you are, but they want to be able to see it at least. And then the last step, which is kind of like the most tedious one of all of them, is editing. Editing really got on my nerves, especially when you're on a time crunch to finish all these essays. But no first draft is perfect. I don't think I know like a single person who wrote their essays and then just submitted it like the next day without editing. Like editing is more than just proofreading. It's also like looking at the idea that you have on the paper and it doesn't make sense. Like some things only make sense to you. Other things like the person next to you might not understand. So you always want to take your time and really read and hone in on what you wrote and make sure it's, you know, it makes sense to even like anyone around you. And this is why it's really important to have like teachers or parents or friends kind of look over your essays, just to get like a third party perspective. Everyone that you ask to kind of help you write their essays, you probably trust them a lot, and they're not out to get you. They're usually just there to give you constructive criticism or feedback that's going to ultimately benefit you once you're actually applying to the college. So those are kind of like my tidbits on kind of talking about like the essay portion, anything written on the Common App. So like the next thing we're going to probably talk about is the curriculum that you take in high school and what classes like are going to benefit you as you're going through the rest of your high school career, or if you're like an incoming freshman in high school, like what your classes are probably going to look like. So for me personally, my school had the AP program versus the IB program. That usually depends on which school you go to. So everything you take obviously depends on your school's range of courses offered. So talking to like a lot of my friends who are also going to Yale from like different schools. Like I've had friends with like private school education their entire lives. And also I have friends who are like from like really rural, like Montana cities. And like just being able to see like what sort of classes are offered really determines like what they're going to take in Yale, and also like what they put on their application. So there's no like perfect application. There's no perfect transcript. Like there are not certain classes that you feel like, oh, if I take this class, I'm like pretty much on the path to getting into a good school. I feel like after taking like maybe like 13 or 14 APs in my high school, like there was no one class where I was like, if I did not take this class, like Yale would not dare to accept me or anything. Or nor was there a class that I was like, oh, when Yale saw this on my transcript, they just had to accept me. So the basis of courses that I took every single year was like your standard English class, math class, science class, some form of social studies or history class. And then I also took 4 years of a language. I took 4 years of Spanish. And that kind of ties into like the second point, which is to challenge yourself. So a lot of the times, like Yale really doesn't care about like, you know, what class you took, but they care about like why you took that class. And a lot of other schools participate in this mindset as well, because this just kind of encapsulates like, oh, again, like a lot of schools don't have a lot of options and you can only kind of work with what you got. So for me, I took this kind of challenge yourself way with my Spanish study. So Spanish is my third language. I speak Chinese at home, and you know, I take English at school as like a mandatory class. But I started learning Spanish when I was in middle school. My middle school program kind of started me off really early. And, you know, I just personally always been kind of like a humanities, reading, writing kind of girl. And learning Spanish is like another romantic language, seeing how like there was a lot of commonalities between English and Spanish kind of gauged my interest in it. And as I learned more and more Spanish, obviously I just kind of graduated more than just from a class that was a kind of like a conjugating verbs, learning grammar kind of class, into something that was more focused on Spanish culture and Spanish history. And honestly, like every kind of humanities class I've ever taken, but in this time, everything's in Spanish. And that was also like a way I found out that I was really interested in history. So being able to challenge yourself and kind of take a class that's outside of your comfort zone is definitely something that colleges like to see. Like for me, I, you know, had the choice to either take English, take Chinese or Spanish or any other language in high school to meet my high school's 2-year foreign language requirement in order to graduate. And I just felt like since I was already learning Chinese at home, you know, I want to challenge myself with a third language that, you know, kind of stems into something more like more focused on culture, or a class that was going to kind of push me to the point where I could learn about like a different language's literature and how the authors chose to write those stories. That was just like a personal thing that I wanted to work with, because I knew I liked studying that in English. So I wanted a class that was going to push me to do that in a different language, while also kind of pushing me to learn more than just what I was learning at home with Chinese. And like the final thing with your high school schedule is finding balance in what is required and also what you enjoy learning. So again, like going back to the language requirement at my high school, that was just a 2-year requirement. I know plenty of people who have just stopped taking a language after their sophomore year, because now like they are allowed to graduate within like the foreign language department. But I just personally kind of, again, I personally enjoyed taking that class. So that was like my elective, and that was like my almost like special treat for myself in my schedule, because I just knew like I would enjoy going to that class every single day, in the midst of taking like the mandatory English class that I had to take in order to graduate, and also, you know, like the mandatory math class. So everything that I felt like one was just kind of like monotonous and pushing me towards, you know, just getting a diploma, was often balanced out with, you know, if it wasn't Spanish, it was also like the orchestra class I took every single day in order to kind of engage myself within fine arts. like there's no one schedule, in my opinion, that is just perfect. Like this is like what you should do. You should take one of this and one of that. It just depends on what you want to do. A lot of my friends, you know, they wanted to go into CS, computer science, when they graduated high school. So they always took like the AP's CS programs at Stevenson. And that was like their replacement of me taking orchestra. Like this was all like, there's a lot of classes in your schedule that you can swap out. And I really encourage students to kind of like swap classes out for classes they truly care about and classes that are going to push them in a way that's going to help them grow and not make them kind of be stubborn about what they're learning, and also kind of like make them resent whatever topic this is. Because again, like unless it's like the mandatory courses, you have liberty to choose whatever you want based on what your school has. So I know like a lot of students around here kind of have different ranges of courses. So again, like when it comes to AP and IB courses, depending on what your school offers, you know, like if you compare yourself to like students at a different school, that's not exactly fair because you don't really know like what was offered. So like at my school, like I took around 13 or 14, and there were like a bunch of other courses, AP courses I never even touched because again, like I just didn't have time in my schedule, or I wasn't just genuinely interested in whatever subject that were. But I know like plenty of other successful kids who are also going to Yale with me next semester, who only took maybe like 3 or 4 because there were only like 5 classes in total that were offered at their school. So again, like looking at like the number of classes you're taking also depends on only where you are. Like you shouldn't look at like anyone else's kind of like outside opinion on what you're taking, because like plenty of schools don't have like 6 levels of Spanish or like 3 pathways of English that you could take. So that's just kind of like looking on the college curriculum and the high school curriculum schedule base. That's just what I would recommend when you're picking your classes. Again, like when it comes to choosing a class and, you know, making sure like you maintaining like a good GPA, when it comes to getting the A and maintaining your good GPA, I feel like it's better to get in like a more comfortable A within a class that you feel like is challenging you enough, but not to the point where like you're struggling and you're like staying up really late trying to finish up work or like panicking about tests. It's better to get an A in like the more comfortable class than to, you know, really struggle and risk getting, you know, like a lower grade or a lower mark just for the sake of the class being like AP or honors. So that just really is my take on what I kind of wish I knew when I was going through high school, and just knowing that I always had the option to kind of like adjust my level instead of just constantly pushing myself to meet a standard just because I feel like, oh, this is going to be like a higher GPA, but it's also going to be, you know, extremely, extremely hard on like my mental health, my sleep schedule. It's going to be hard on me like as I'm studying, and I'm putting off other things that could also contribute to, you know, my application, or could also contribute just to my overall well-being. So it's just a lot of stuff that goes on the basis of balance, because again, like this is your high school curriculum, like this is your high school curriculum. This is not like, again, a make or break in your college application. So it just really depends on like what you want to do, how you want to challenge yourself, how much work you want to put in, and then also like what your goals are with these actions. So that's just kind of like my takes on how I chose classes and how like I also chose like which classes to take. You also sometimes want to think about future fields you might want to go into. So some kids go into high school knowing like what they want to do. Like when they, like I have friends who like when they were freshmen, they were like, okay, I know I'm going to go into biomedical engineering. So I want to like really pick up on the engineering courses offered here. I really want to study really closely during my AP bio class. But other students kind of come into high school not really knowing what their future field is. Like I was kind of in the middle of that. I knew I wanted to do something with humanities, but I just didn't know like which route specifically to take. So that's also when you want to think about like trying different classes that you might think would fit you. Maybe you're taking an additional history course but you're also trying out like this new engineering program offered as well. And this also kind of goes with just being able to trust yourself, and that like there shouldn't be like regretting taking courses or not taking them, because you never know like what you truly want to do or what you want to like spend the rest of your future with until you actually try it. And high school classes are probably like the best way to do that. If it's not a high school class, it's probably a high school club. So like your freshman year or sophomore year, before things start to like get settled down with like e-board positions and elections, you just really want to try what you can do and just see how much you can do, how much of it, and see if you genuinely like it, then you can pursue it and really dedicate your time into putting into like a really good product for by the time you kind of start putting everything for show on your college app. All right, so this kind of leads pretty well into the clubs and research and what I find to be really helpful with what you do. So I did a lot of clubs. I was all over the place, and I still, like, thinking back, I'm still pretty all over the place with my clubs. So for the core clubs I did, which tends to be 3 to 4 per student, were debate, field hockey, orchestra, and violin, kind of participating in that ensemble, and also summer research. So obviously the latter is like a one-time thing. It was just like a summer investment that I did in order to kind of get exposure into science, because I kind of figured out during quarantine that, you know, studying epidemics and disease was something I might be interested in, and like the development of those viruses and how they spread. That was something that kind of caught my attention. So that was my research. I reached out to a couple of professors within the neighboring cities. A lot of them were in Chicago, a lot of university professors, and a couple my research professor responded to me, and over Zooms and over kind of email communication, I was able to kind of shadow her and what she was doing with her research on hepatitis. So that was kind of my research experience. It was just a really good way to get exposed to something that I might do in the future. Like now I'm majoring in something that she kind of exposed me to. So that was like, had I not done the research, I probably would have never figured out that this is something I want to dedicate the rest of my life to within public health or something like that. Research gets a nice rep from college application season. A lot of people like to put emphasis on doing research. Again, research only applies to like if you're doing like a STEM-based field. Like if you are completely set on doing like humanities, you know, you want to major in like communications, or you want to do political science, then doing like lab research probably will confuse your it's probably going to confuse your admissions officer. It's probably going to harm your application more than it's going to help. To what degree, I'm not sure, because like I don't read everyone's application. But research and clubs really should fit in what you want to do if you know what kind of field you want to go into. So like a lot of my friends who are going into like education or something like that, like they really don't need to do research. Like if they do research, that's all honestly like a little bit of a waste of their time, because they're dedicating an entire summer to a field they're not even going to do. But if you are going to something that's STEM related, if you're going to go into engineering or CS, if you are on the pre-med track, going into research and just shadowing and learning about it and getting exposure from a professor to know what it's going to be like when you actually do it for real in college, it looks really nice on your college application, because this is like a really good way to show to colleges that you are dedicated and you're committed to their college's program for whatever major this might be. The same thing goes with clubs. So clubs are like a huge investment for every high school student. You want to do not a lot of clubs, but you want to put a lot of your time into a couple clubs that you feel like are really important. So for me, all my core clubs with orchestra, violin, debate, and field hockey, those were all 4-year commitments. And coincidentally, they were all kind of they're all kind of like birth. I like started all of them in middle school. So I kind of went into high school knowing that if I was going to do any 3 extracurriculars, it was going to be these 3 because I already spent a lot of time and I really liked playing or participating in these clubs. So there doesn't necessarily have to be some sort of like theme with all of your clubs because you do want to get a good exposure to different types of activities. This kind of goes into like what each activity kind of has done for me personally when it comes to like what I've done in the past few years and how I presented these clubs to the admissions committee. So there are a lot of things like within being on a team that gives you exposure that like colleges like to see with, you know, how, again, like with your personality, how you engage in a group setting. Being able to do debate kind of shows like your ability to do research and your ability to speak as like ability to speak as a presenter and being able to engage with others and access communication. And then like violin kind of like I presented about like learning violin as a way of being like studious and meticulous with my work because that was just like an activity that really pushed me to be very careful and be very dedicated to what I was doing. A lot of times clubs just really require you to focus on how you're presenting it. This kind of goes into the theme of volunteering and volunteer clubs. So almost every high school kind of engages in this idea of honor societies. So with the most general one being National Honor Society, NHS. So I participated in 3 honor societies when I was in high school. I was part of NHS, but I was also part of the JIANG Honor Society, which is basically it's an honor society for students who have done 3 or 4 years of orchestra, choir, or band. And then I also participated in the National Spanish and Portuguese Honor Society, which is the result of taking 4 years of Spanish. So these honor societies, what I really liked about Spanish and Triam honor societies was that it was very focused, and I felt like that was a better presentation as someone who does volunteer work better than NHS, because NHS you can kind of like do whatever volunteer services you want. They really don't have like a general way to grab onto you as a trend. You could do like you could choose to do multiple different types of service ops, or you could do like one consistent theme, but that was completely up to you. And a lot of times kids just kind of did NHS for the credit, so they just kind of gather whatever activities they could get onto or they could do for multiple times, and that's how they called it a day. But within like something like Spanish Honor Society and Triam, all of my volunteer work was very focused on giving back to the like a very specific community in a very specific way. So for Triumph, that was anything music related, you know, performing at nursing homes or, you know, performing at benefit concerts that raised money for students to learn music in underprivileged areas. And that was something I just really engaged in. I really liked doing, to the point where I did it for 2 years out of the 2 years that were offered to me. And that's just something I feel like for students who are trying to get into service clubs, this is something you want to keep in mind, because the more specific you are with your like volunteer work and the theme that you hold, the kind of stronger the presentation you are, because now you're showing that there is this one cause that you're really attracted to. And that's going to something that you might carry on into your work as you go through college and you graduate, and you're like your work ethic in the future. Like this is just something that colleges like to see when it comes to consistency. And the same thing goes with clubs, being a consistent member for 3 or 4 years, or however many years the club was offered to you. That shows really good commitment, and it gives colleges like a green flag about your behavior and how you would contribute to the school in general. So the last kind of portion about stuff that you do before you apply, before you submit, is ultimately the timeline. So this timeline starts in early junior year. That's when you really kind of start letting college kind of seep into your mind. Sometimes I know students kind of come into high school with this mindset of, you know, this within the next 4 years, I'm going to pick a school that's going to determine the next 4 years after that. But really, I feel like college is not really something worth fussing over, especially as a freshman and a sophomore. Like that is your time to genuinely have fun. You're at a new school, you're meeting a lot of new people. There are new clubs, new classes you can take. That is just the time for you to really explore. When I was a freshman, I joined maybe like 8 to 10 clubs. I was not consistent with going to those club meetings, but it was just something that I wanted to try out. I was a part of, different volunteer clubs. I was a part of like a business club that I ended up dropping because that just wasn't something I was engaged in. But freshman year, you should pack up your after school schedule just a little bit. Go to a couple meetings. If you don't like it, drop it. There's nothing wrong with that. But you should at least go in to freshman year with the idea of, yeah, I'm going to try a lot of clubs. I'm going to see what I like, especially if you don't know what field you're going into. But also with extracurriculars, you don't want to think of them as like, I'm going to put this on a college app. Sometimes they're just really fun clubs that you just want to try out that you feel like isn't just going to be like a leadership role. You're going to go after like the president position. For me, that was like the freshman mentor program at my school. I did that for 2 years where I just gave up 20 minutes of my day to kind of mentor freshmen as they transition into my really large school. That wasn't really exactly like a pinnacle moment in my college application. I think it was, I don't even remember it kind of being mentioned in my application, but that was a club I genuinely just like, that was like a nice break in my day. It was no stress. It kind of gave me a break from like the competitiveness that was my high school. And that's just also something to think about. But once you come into junior year, you want to kick off with your SAT, ACT prep. Colleges are becoming more and more lenient with like being test blind or test optional. When I applied to Yale, Yale was taking it as test optional, but at the time, like I already had a pretty satisfying score. So I just took that and I applied with it. SAT, ACT prep really depends on the type of person you are. If you are like someone who wants to take it slow, then I maybe start earlier. But if you're someone who just wants to get it over with, if you're a good test taker, I'm so jealous of you. But if you're a good test taker, then maybe it's just like a couple months out of your year, just push through it, take your test and just call it a day. But either way, junior year is when you want to get that done. The earlier, the better, because then you can focus on everything else. Junior year is also the time to kind of talk about extracurricular and e-board positions. At this point, you should probably have compiled maybe like 3 or 4 clubs that you're genuinely really invested in, and you've gone to pretty much every meeting. And if you want to acquire some sort of leadership position, this is the time to start thinking about like, do I really want to tie myself completely down to this club next year? And another thing is just keep studying, keeping up your GPA. Junior year is tough. This is the time when you take a lot of APs, if not only APs. So remember, want to think about like your GPA and your transcript is still the basis of your application. One thing that a lot of people ask about is, like how important is it to be like a straight A student or just get like a really high GPA? And in retrospect, it's pretty important in the sense that if you're applying to like a top tier school, pretty much everyone has like the same transcript. Everyone's taken like calculus course, everyone's taken like AP language, and everyone's kind of got like the same grades. So being able to kind of keep up with the academic rigor that your dream school or like the schools you want to go to require and expect is really important as you try to apply within junior year, because that's when they know like this is the time you're really challenging yourself with the hardest classes you think you can take. So between early and middle junior year or like throughout junior year, you want to start thinking about what colleges you want to apply to. So this process is more than just, like the ranking. A lot of the time people just look at ranking and they just go, okay, first top 10, we'll apply to all those, couple of safeties, and then we'll call it a day. But the college picking process, not even the application process, is also its own thing. You want to think about like financial aid. If, going to an in-state school is going to be a little bit better on you guys financially than going to an out of state school that's probably a little bit more pricey, but like the program is still the same. At the same time, you want to think about the quality of the program, especially if you're someone who is pretty much set on like anything like pre-law, pre-med, you really want to take into consideration what that school is going to offer you in terms of support and also in terms of kind of benefits that as you apply through med school or if you want to go into law school. So like for me, I kind of went through this around February of this year when I was talking about like getting into Yale, and then if I really wanted to put into like the financial investment that Yale was gonna require from me. So this is usually the time when it comes to like other state schools kind of giving you full ride scholarships versus going to like a really pricey school that you know is going to be like a really good investment. So when I got into U of I got in for like their new information science school, which is currently ranked like one of the top schools for this major. And they offered me a full ride for that program. But at the same time, I knew that, you know, Yale was also going to offer me, while it was a little bit larger of a price tag, was going to offer me like copious amounts of resources and academic support. That's just something that you can't give up. But like, had it been like a different school, then maybe like the perspective on U of I's program and offer would have been different. So that's something you also want to take into consideration. And then just a couple of like other aspects of a college that you want to think about would just be like, how's the social scene? Does everyone only study, and are you okay with that kind of mindset? Or does everyone kind of like to relax on the weekends, and if that kind of fits your endeavors? I think sometimes this aspect of like the social and the connection of each individual college kind of gets underrepresented when students are picking colleges that they want to apply to, because you don't want to end up at a school that's got like this incredible pre-med program, but like everyone is miserable there. Like for me, if that was my choice, I don't personally think it's worth it, because I'm like someone who benefits and grows in terms of learning when everyone around me is like very encouraging and everyone wants to be there. So that's just something I just really recommend and I really think is important. So now we get to like kind of like middle junior year specifically. For me, that's when I took the ACT and SAT. So I applied with the ACT, and then the SAT was something my school like made me take in order to graduate in terms of like the Illinois education program. That's when I took it. I feel like personally for me, I took the ACT at a pretty like bad time for myself, because at the time, because of COVID, I was playing field hockey in the spring instead of the fall, and I took the ACT during the spring as well. So for like 3 months of my junior year, I was just like going to school, going to practice or games, coming home, showering, putting off homework just to get in a couple of like ACT practice tests in, because I knew like this was the time. I did not want to bring ACT into the summer before senior year, because I knew that's when I wanted to start looking at other stuff for college. So if I could go back, I would probably take the ACT earlier in my junior year, but you know, that was also like a very niche situation. Most of the time when I was talking to my friends who weren't affected by COVID, they took it middle junior year and they were fine about it. Like this was like pre-AP season, and this was like, you know, earlier in the semester, and they just kind of like pushed it out and everything was fine. But that's typically the recommended time to take it. In terms of recommendations, that middle junior year was kind of the time I started thinking about it. I didn't ask yet, because teachers are not ready for you to ask them about recommendation letters just yet. But that's when I started thinking about like, okay, out of like all of my junior year teachers, who would I pick? Who represents, like who has seen me at my best? Like if I struggle immensely in this class and I don't ask for help, then probably don't ask this teacher to write my rec letter. But for me, I started thinking about like the teachers that really saw like who I was as a learner, but also as someone who really likes working with others and being able to kind of work in a group setting. End of junior year, this is around like AP testing time. Like once I was kind of done with my AP tests, I actually ended up asking a couple of my teachers. I asked two of my teachers. One of them actually asked me to remind him or more formally ask him when we were just starting school. So recommendation letters tend to be vary between what your teachers like prefer when it comes to recommendation letters. So one of my rec letter teachers, the one who asked me to ask him in the fall, he writes letters really quickly. That's just his personal, that is his personal like style when it comes to these. My other recommendation letter, he takes it a little bit slower. So he actually asked me to kind of fill out the brag sheet really early in the summer of my junior year, so he could have like the rest of the summer to kind of draft up the letter that he really wanted to reflect who I was and help me get into the school. So end of junior year is when you kind of test the waters. Most of the time, that's when things will click, but sometimes your teacher might be like, oh yeah, like for sure, but I'm not going to do it over the summer. I'm just going to have you ask me later. And that just something you want to work on and plan out between you and your teachers. So now we kind of get into the junior, early senior summer. So I have here, like, you're finishing up essays as an early senior. That was me personally. I started my college application in the summer. So I didn't like write out the full essay in the summer, but I kind of got an idea. I picked a Common App question that I knew I wanted to answer, threw around a couple of ideas. I have like over 5-6 versions of my Common App essay. Like that just shows how much editing is important, like how important editing is when you're trying to write an essay, like even in general, but especially with the Common App. That also comes from the fact that, like, for my school specifically in high school, we didn't do a lot of creative writing. All of my writing from English class was very analytical. It was very like argument, line by line based, nothing really like flowed together. So that's why I also kind of like had to do a lot of editing because this was a new style of writing for me. If your school kind of goes by like the AP English classes, then this might also be something that you might have to deal with. But this isn't like a beautiful creative masterpiece that you have to come up with. It's just it's like anything else that you're new to and you want to learn about. You just want to kind of push through what you're learning and just kind of adapt. Don't get frustrated, keep editing, and just know that in the end something nice will come together. So that's me in the summer. Me in August and September, I was playing field hockey. That was also part of the reason why I pushed everything up a little into the summer, because I knew, like, if I was going to be playing club field hockey after school and also doing like the club commitments that I've tied myself to a leadership position for, I probably don't have the most time on top of classes to be grinding out like a bunch of essays every single night. So you also want to plan ahead as you enter your junior year, senior year, summer. So finishing up essays in the fall, kind of editing last minute, spending some extra time, sleeping a little bit later just to make sure essays are done. This is also the time to collect all forms and letters. So FAFSA, you fill it out in the fall. Letters of recommendation from your teachers, collect them in the fall. Letters of recommendation from your counselor, collect that in the fall. Your counselor knows he or she has to write a letter for you, but it's also nice just to formally ask and to just, check in once in a while. When there are a couple weeks left of the application timeline, especially if you're applying early, you want to check up on your teachers, because again, they're not just here to write your college application. They're here to also teach. Like, that is their job. They are teaching, they're working, and your letter of recommendation might not be at the forefront of their thought. They might be thinking about something else for their current students versus their previous students. So it's just good to check in and be like, hi, how's the letter going? When do you think I can have it? Or if you are like on a little bit more of a pressure standpoint, then you might say something like, hi, like, I really need this letter by the end of next week because I want to apply a little bit earlier than the actual deadline. It just depends on when you want to finish your application, if you want to go early, if you want to apply just in the regular season. But then that is just something that's between you and your teacher that you chose for your recommendation, your counselor. Your teacher will not check up for you. Like, that is something a lot of my friends didn't realize, was that like their recommendation letter teacher was not going to be like, hey, just heads up, I will have it in a couple of weeks. Some teachers might be really nice and do that, but most teachers are too preoccupied to also worry about like you knowing when you're going to get your letter. They're expecting you to take charge of this. This is your application, and they want to make sure that you are going to get through everything you need to do. And they're just here on the sideline passing you whatever you need. And then finally, the last thing, especially if you're applying early, is to submit the application. Applying early is an investment in a bit of itself. So some things that kind of confuse a lot of people and still kind of confuses some people when you talk about early application are the 2/3 types of early application processes that you might go through. So the most common is early decision. So schools like Duke and Northwestern do early decision. So those schools are just like, once you apply, you get in, you have to go. Other schools like U Chicago have this option of early action, which is basically saying you can apply here. If you get in, we're not going to force you to go, but you can come if you want to. A lot of schools do ED and EA because it's easy for students. You can apply to multiple schools. If you do early decision, you can only apply to one early decision school. But something that happened to me specifically was the restrictive early action process. So restrictive early action is only participated by Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So these 4 schools are really picky with their early applicants because they know that students who usually apply to one of these will probably also apply to the rest of them at some point. And in order to maintain like there's no too much overlap, they only let you apply to one of them. But that just that means more than just like when I applied to Yale, I couldn't apply to Harvard, Princeton, or Stanford, but I also couldn't apply to any other private institutions. So I couldn't do like early action for U Chicago while I applied to Yale because that was just something Yale didn't let me do. That's the restrictive part because they're saying you can't apply anywhere else unless it's a public school, like if it's a state school, like UIUC. I applied to that school early, but they were saying, but even if you get in, you don't have to come. But the risky part of going to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, or Stanford early is that if you don't get in, like that's it. Like you didn't get in and you don't have any other early schools that you apply to either to kind of cushion you that also have like that level of prestigious ranking. So that's just like the risk that people take that I took when I chose to apply to Yale early. And that's also something you want to think about when you think about the order of schools that you're applying to. Obviously, why people like early application processes is that the acceptance percentage is a little bit higher because, you know, when you're that committed, they tend to let in a little bit more students, but also means that a little like the population of applicants is also smaller because not everyone is willing to take that risk. So it's just a little bit more safe. It's like a safer net to go early. But if you're going to go with restrictive early action, that's also at risk in a bit of itself because you know that that is the only school you can go for. All right, so the last thing is the final part of your application, which is your interview. So the interview varies for each school. Some schools give everyone interviews. Some schools don't do interviews at all. So like for U of I doesn't do interviews at all because there's a lot of applicants. My Yale interview is like the epitome of like very casual, being relaxed and being yourself. I'm pretty sure next year they might go in person based on how, you know, the pandemic kind of carries out. But my application interview was online, it was virtual, and it was very casual. There was nothing about like dressing up or kind of preparing a speech and being ready to kind of like discuss yourself. It's honestly not even an interview. It's kind of just a conversation between you, an applicant who really wants to go to the school, and an alumni who too really wants to go to the school and really cares about the school. My tips for interviews are just to genuinely be yourself. Like this kind of goes back to the idea of your personality. Like no one's gonna hate on what kind of personality you have. They just want to see how you present it and how you like behave and how you want to really engage in whatever the school has to offer. My interview just kind of went with like the general questions of like, why do you want to go to this school? Why this major? Stuff like that, like tell me about yourself. It's honestly kind of like a repeat of the Yale application that I wrote, because I did write essays about why the school and why Yale. But being able to say it out loud, like a third party, an actual human being is able to see you kind of like project that emotion onto like into discussion. And that sometimes is a better show of your personality and your commitment than just like the flowery language you put into your essay. So after we kind of did those questions, we kind of talked about like my questions for her. And I think as a candidate for a college, it's really important to ask questions and show your interest. But it's also important to monitor what kind of questions you're asking. Like, don't just ask the generic, like, oh, why did you go to this school? Like I asked like kind of questions about like the social scene at Yale, like, what's going on? What is everyone doing? What's like everyone's favorite spot on campus? Just questions that kind of get your alumni interviewer to kind of reminisce on when they were in college and just kind of like remind them of why they like this college so much that they are taking time out of their job to interview kids who were once like them. So interviews also, sometimes people feel like interviews either have like a really big impact or a really small impact. This kind of goes back to the first idea of like the Common App. Again, like interviews can't make or break your application. Like an incredible interview is not going to all of a sudden get you the acceptance like 2 minutes after your interview ends. But like a normal interview, probably not going to do much. Like it all depends on like how you are. So it's all going to be fine with an interview, whether you get one or not. It probably doesn't determine if you're going to get into that specific school. But if you do have an interview, it's just genuinely just a conversation and nothing to be stressing over. All right, so that kind of brings us to the end of what I've prepared for you guys. So see, there are like a couple of questions in the chat. We're just gonna do like a quick Q&A. I'll go through like the questions in the chat and answer them to the best of my ability, based on like what you guys kind of asked. So I'm just gonna start at the top. If you have any other questions that you're thinking of, like as we're going through the rest of these, feel free to put them in. We're just gonna get through them. So like the first question is, how many times did you revise your essay until you were satisfied? For me, I wrote like multiple versions of my essay, and I think that's a bit overkill, but I revised it maybe like 10 times, like to the point, like not to the point where like I restructured every single sentence, but like grammar or style changes, changing up like how I wrote it and what I was trying to convince. But this obviously varies for multiple people. Some people are satisfied with their essay maybe like 2 or 3 times after they revise, but pretty much every single person edits their essay at least once, because most people just kind of get a third party perspective on their essays. Maybe like the first time you write it, you get someone to read it and then they give you feedback and then you edit it. And then maybe then you're just completely satisfied. That just completely depends on what kind of writer and how comfortable you are with your own writing. AP classes, I took around 13 to 14. That was just like either if it wasn't like a required class, it was just like a fun class I chose that was an AP course, like AP Spanish 5 and 6. My thoughts on taking Chinese for 4 years. So I don't think there's definitely like I don't think taking Chinese versus anything else is gonna harm you. Like as long as you're like pushing yourself in that class and you're not just like taking it as like an easy course, taking like the lower levels of Chinese just to fulfill the graduation requirement. If you're like, pushing yourself with accelerated and AP courses, then that just shows your commitment just as much as, taking any other language. For me, personally, like I have nothing against taking Chinese. It's just I just wanted to learn more about Spanish because I felt like I already had like a pretty good understanding of my Chinese abilities. And I want to learn something that I couldn't have access to outside of my own home, like Chinese culture and history, literature. Like, if it wasn't like my parents, probably my grandparents or extended family could kind of catch me up on that. But like no one in my family was going to be able to give me the cohesive Spanish curriculum I got. So as a result, I did not take AP Chinese. Is it better? So for foreign language, is it better to learn more than 4 years? So learning a language for 4 years, that's just like the high school curriculum. When I say I took Spanish for 4 years, that just means I took Spanish freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year. How much does the weight of the superintendent SSL award me? I actually don't know what that is. So I'm not too sure how to answer that question. Another question is, for sports, do you have to be captain of the team? You don't have to be captain. Obviously, like if you have like D1 athletes that are like playing on your team, then obviously like they're probably gonna be captain. And that has nothing to do with like your leadership skills or anything. But honestly, I don't think you have to be captain, like have the title in order for a sport to mean anything to you. I think it's just what you learn from being on a team, how you work, and how you engage with others. That matters even more. And then just being captain just kind of like shortens that idea, because when you're captain, people just assume you are, but you don't have to be captain. How do you show personality through writing? Do you mean write in more informal speech? No, writing informal speech is not like, that's not something you want to do in your application. When I say like show personality through writing, I mean like when you write, you don't just write in like monotonous sentences. Like it's not something in English class where you're just kind of writing what is literally there. Like having fun with descriptions. For me, I wrote about food in a couple of my supplement essays. And when I wrote about the food, I just like kind of brought out like what I thought the food smelled like, and I described it in a way that wasn't just like, oh, so like the sandwich had like this, and this in there. But instead I kind of wrote more about like, oh, the tomato juice was like literally was dripping down like my like something like, you want to bring out personality through descriptions, not exactly through informal speech, but more just about like your perspective on what's happening, because everyone has a different perspective on like everyday events. So personality just means like the way you see the world, and nothing like not something that's like very objective and straightforward. All right. Skills I recommend students to build at an early age in high school or middle school. So these when I think about developing skills to recommend to students, I don't really think about like academics. I'm thinking more like good study habits and work ethics. So that for me is just, being able to have discipline with myself and being able to focus on a strict schedule. So for me, like I played a sport for a couple of months in the year. So that just means like I had to push myself to know like maybe sometimes I couldn't just slack off and go on my phone. This is something I kind of developed at an early age, because like this is just how I like grew up. I always really enjoy, like I just kind of grew up with the idea of, you know, at this time I would practice violin for a couple of hours, and this is just, this is just like the environment I grew up in. So that's just something I recommend for students develop early in high school or middle school, especially as you add more course loads. So what career path would you like to have if you're interested in humanities? So for me, I'm like a huge humanities girl. I'm looking into pre-law and going into something with pre-law and potentially public health, like connecting like logistics and probably policy, and going with like more of like the political implications and also like the execution of how American public health is going through. But humanities, there are plenty of other options. Like it's not just like being an engineer or being a doctor or a lawyer are like the only options. Like you can go into education, you can go into research. But career paths wise, that's just like, I don't know every career path that there are offered in the world, but I'm sure like if you do a little bit of research, you'll be able to find something that kind of fits with you. All right, so research opportunities. I kind of talked about research opportunities. So some schools, like my school, I didn't participate in it specifically, but we have a program called Spark. Spark is basically you apply to be in it, and once you are accepted, the school kind of helps you with the whole reaching out to professors. But you can also do that on your own. It's just if you do it through your school, there's probably a little bit more credibility between you and whichever professor you end up with, because they know like faculty at your school was able to help you get there. But research opportunities really just depends on how open you are and how willing you are to get out there. You have to be able to accept that you won't be in every research group that you want to be in. But if you just keep applying, keep reaching out, and just being genuinely interested, professors are not completely like shocked at the idea at a high school or wanting to kind of shadow them. So it just depends on like how much effort you put into trying to find it. If it's and that kind of determines the level of how hard it is. All right, so next couple questions. I applied with the ACT, but I also took the SAT as like a graduation requirement. So technically I took both. In terms of schools applied to, I only applied to 2 schools, and this kind of goes into like other questions about like why I chose Yale. So Yale was my dream school. I have been exposed to Yale as like an institution. So that's just why I chose Yale. Once I applied Yale early, so once I got in, I was just pretty much set on going to Yale. Like this was like, that was it. That was the goal all along. And my safety school that I chose was UIUC, which is pretty standard for a lot of students in this area. There are a lot of questions about what makes or break your application. Nothing makes or breaks your application. Not a test score, not an essay, not your interview. Every decision that the committee makes is that they look at something holistically, and if things don't match up holistically, that might be why they make the decision. Or if your ACT score is not, like if you feel like it's not good enough, it's probably not the reason you're getting in or not getting in. There's some stuff about private college counseling. I personally did not do private college counseling. I know plenty of people who have done it and they have been successful. And I know plenty of people who have done it on their own who are also equally successful. It just depends. If you are like completely lost, then maybe a college counselor is a good idea. But if you feel like you're pretty like solid, you got this, then no one's saying that like if you get a college counselor, you're like guaranteed a good school. So again, like the chances of getting into a good school with or without is completely based on your own decision. Like no one's kind of like pushing you to get it or like determining it. All right, so how are you involved in orchestra as a violinist? Were there any clubs that are associated with orchestra? So the way I did orchestra was I was at school I was in like the highest level after I auditioned in. That was an audition process. And then I also did the leadership attachment to it, which was like the management behind it, writing concert notes, kind of making sure that scheduling was okay, kind of working with the director one-on-one. So that was like the club I did. Ended up becoming like the vice president of orchestra. Like that was the title they gave me. It was just like a lot of working with like faculty, but it wasn't like a legitimate club necessarily. But as a violinist, I like wasn't too involved. I was just like a member. I did youth orchestra outside of school. That was like a leadership in and of itself when you're like first stand, like the first 2 chairs. So that's like probably the most involved I was, which is pretty much just like being in the orchestra. Other questions? So, well, I get this question a lot. How do you connect pre-law with your major, history of science and medicine? So this major is like, it's the history of like how like human public health was kind of developed throughout the years and how we've evolved our sense of like health and safety. So I kind of connected pre-law with this idea of like in debate, when I did debate in high school, I always debated a lot of policy bills about public health, and especially during the pandemic, that was like the height of bills about public safety and how like Congress in the United States should handle it. And that was kind of when I realized that maybe going into policy about how American government kind of handles our like our human health and medicine access is something I want to focus on. And then this is a major that is only offered, I believe, only at Yale and Harvard. And that's why I was so set on going into Yale, especially after seeing this major because it's so niche. It's very like not a lot of schools offer this because it is a very specific type of history. So going into pre-law and going to law school is gonna give me like the chance of having the access to all the written portion that's gonna help me with like policy in the future and maybe like going into more capable aspects of being able to kind of contribute to American policy for public health. So there's some questions about actually 蛮像John, how much time do we have left?
Yeah, we still have it's okay if we can end early, that's fine, but do you finish all of the questions?
Yeah, I'm just gonna get through a couple more questions. So there's some stuff about debate and then like how debate has influenced me. So debate at my school was like an hour meeting 2 times a week. So like bare minimum, that was like 2 hours of my week schedule kind of dedicated. But debate is honestly, there's no like bare minimum for your debate participation in any event. What I told a lot of like the underclassmen I mentored was that the amount of time you put into debate is the achievement or the skill level you get out of it. So if you were someone who was really dedicated and went to a lot of like office hour meetings with captains and did a lot of practice rounds with mocks, then you tended to get a little bit more recognition for your debate works at state or national circuits. So for me, I feel like I put like a pretty like average amount of time. I did like my portion of the research and editing, and I also practiced on my own and with my friends, and that seemed to kind of work out for me. So again, debate besides like the club meetings time is just pretty much whatever you want to put in is whatever you'll get out. Some questions about like how do you change your essays for different schools? Again, this just goes like I don't have like the most advice for this because again, I only applied to 2 schools. And the only overlap between those 2 schools was why this major and why this school. And I also happened to apply to like 2 different majors for these schools. But generally, like if I were to approach this after going through the entire application process, I would just say like doing research and knowing like specific aspects of the school that has made you want to go through with applying, that is something you want to make sure is highlighted in each essay despite like all the questions being the same. All right. Violin competition, I did not participate in violin competitions. I just personally didn't have the time for that on my schedule. Let's see. Let's go through a couple more questions. My rec letter teachers. So usually you get rec letter teachers from one STEM oriented teacher and one humanities oriented teacher. But for me, because of COVID, I felt like I wasn't too connected with my STEM teachers at the time because class would just be, you know, like doing a problem, going over it, doing the problem, going over it until the bell rang. So I actually had 2 of my humanities teachers. I had my US history teacher and my AP language teacher write my recommendation letters because I felt like in that class, I really excelled in being able to not only understand content, but also be able to present it in a way that I could also help my peers. But recommendation letters, honestly, it's more important about who is seeing your best version of yourself versus then what class they teach. How often did you meet with your school counselor during junior year? So again, my junior year was online, so meeting with my counselor, unless it was like a pressing issue, was actually a bit difficult because counselors are busy during the year. They're not just like in their office, kind of waiting for students to come in. But I would say like keeping in touch with your counselor throughout your high school career is pretty nice in general. Just being able to keep your counselor up to date with what you're doing and how's it going, just letting them know you as a person. Because when they write their letter of recommendation, they're not writing about you like academically, they're writing about you as a person and how you've managed high school. And just kind of keeping in contact with them, like dropping in once in a while. Like it doesn't have to be like a scheduled thing every single week, but just kind of popping in and be like, hey, like things are going great. If you have like an achievement you want to tell them about or something like that, just kind of like befriending your counselor. But you don't have to like meet with them like every single week, like on a Friday after school. Like that's not necessary. All right, so I think this is gonna be the last question that and it's gonna be about club. So it's gonna be like the club activities achievement portion. So the question is kind of about like what about talk about the club, like clubs and how important they are. So it doesn't really matter like what type of club you do. A lot of people have done like really interesting clubs. I know a friend who went to Harvard and she was like really invested in knitting club. Like it doesn't matter what type of club you do. It's just genuinely like how much time you put into it. So clubs sometimes if you do competitive ones, they tend to give you like the more achievement award portion of your Common App. I would say like in terms of achievements and awards being important, they're not like the pinnacle. Like again, there are only 5. You can only put 5 awards in there. And they do limit you on what you can put in. So that's also a reflection of like the Common App knowing that it's not like the most normal thing for high school kids to get, or just a bunch of like recognition. So I wouldn't say like they again like nothing makes or breaks. If you can't fill up all 5 slots or all 10 activity slots, that's not going to be the reason why you didn't get in. So in terms of like if you want to put like a club achievement in terms of an award, that's fine. If you want to talk about like the club you might have created, I know like a lot of my friends who have tried to create clubs in high school, you can always talk about that. That's something pretty unique because that probably means you have a really deep connection with whatever club you founded. So that I think that's really cool. Do I think it's like better than like just joining an already established club? No, because you know, again, clubs are all kind of all on the same plane when it comes to what type of club. It just depends on how you present it. All right. So I think those are all the questions I've answered. Thank you so much, everyone. But with that being said, thank you so much for coming tonight. If you have any further questions, I'm sure like you can contact me some other way. But for all those of you who are applying in the next fall, I wish you the best of luck. It does get better as the application season goes on, and of course it does end eventually, so it's nothing that it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life if you know one thing doesn't go to plan. But with that being said, everyone have a great night. Thank you so much. Thank you to my Xiaozhang for hosting this tonight. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to kind of share my insight with everyone.
Evelyn, thank you so much. 你可不可以把你那个联系方式，如果你喜欢的话，你可以放到 chat 里边，大家也可以。
Yeah, sure. So,
yeah. 另外一个那个 Evelyn 也可以就是接受那种服务，大家喜欢找他 tutor 什么Evelyn 你可以说一下。
Oh yeah, sure. So I put my email in the chat. It's just my Gmail account. If in the fall, if you would like me to kind of look over some essays that you might be writing, I'm totally we can totally discuss like what that would look like, and just me kind of acting like a mini outside counselor for your college application process. So if you're interested, emails in the chat, and then just let me know when the time rolls around.
谢谢非常感谢。
Thank you so much, Evelyn. That's very insightful, and hopefully, I guess my daughter can look at you as an inspiration. So,
hey, that's great.
你写了吗 ？Evelyn， 你写了吗？你留了你的 email 了吗
？email 在那个 chat 里边了。
Evelyn Jiang at gmail.com.
OK. OK， 非常好，非常好。感谢，也感谢家长们啊。这个周末很辛苦，然后为了孩子都来参加。 那谢谢Evelyn，Thank you so much。
谢谢
那
马校长。
哎，非常感谢。那我就关掉这个会议了。
好吧，好，
我
再见。
们再保持联系哈，谢谢。
会的，再见。
哎，好的，再见。
All right. Good luck to everybody.
Yeah，拜拜，再见。
Okay, thank